Sure.
So first of all, Steven Oritt, his directing debut or his directing background began in music videos. And from there, he moved into the documentary world with the feature-length film American Native, the story of a reclusive tribe of Indians living 30 minutes from New York City in the hills of New Jersey. Steven then launched James Lucy Productions, whose first project was the documentary Kid Yarmulke, which I have to say, I want to figure out how to watch because it sounds great. Kid Yarmulke, an intimate profile of troubled boxer Zachary Woolman and his path to redemption through boxing, Judaism, and sobriety. My Name Is Sara is Steven's narrative feature debut and has appeared in more than 25 festivals internationally, probably more now than when that was written, and has taken home a number of Best Feature awards. And his follow-up documentary, Accidental Climber, was released on digital and DVD platforms last August. The film looks at one man's attempt to become the oldest American to climb Mount Everest. So welcome, Steven, and welcome to those of you who have just joined in the last few minutes. For those who have, you're welcome to put questions in the chat as you think of them, and or we may end up having folks unmute themselves since we have a smaller group tonight. So I want to start off, Steven, by asking a question you probably get a lot, but if you could humor us. How did you come across this story, and why did you choose this to be your narrative debut feature?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for having me, Neal, and having the film. Really appreciate you giving us some spotlight. So thanks very much. So the film was I have two producing partners on the film, and one of them is Sarah Guralnick Shapiro's son, Mickey Shapiro, and Mickey is friends with a friend of mine who became our other producer, and his name's Andy, and Andy introduced the two of us, Mickey and I, and Andy had told me about Sarah's experience. He had taken Mickey to the village where Sarah was from Koretz, and then to the village where she hid about 5 years prior to us ever talking about doing a movie. And just basically out of that visit, out of that trip, kind of came a discussion between the two of them. And I was then brought into the fold and was sent Sarah's testimony that she had given with the USC Shoah Foundation, and watched about an hour and 40-minute testimony, and was just captivated throughout it, and thought that it was a very fresh perspective on the Holocaust, given that it was from the perspective of a young 13-year-old Polish girl who was forced to become an adult overnight. And so I just I guess I thought that this would be a story that should be shared with more people than just within her family, because ultimately she really didn't tell many people. She only spoke of it kind of later in life, and so I was very fortunate. I got an opportunity to do that and share the film with the world.
Very good. Okay. And I think before I open it up more to our audience, I also wanted to know, if you don't mind talking about it, are there ways in which the film, its themes, the story, how you made it, relate to your own Jewish identity or sense of what it means to be Jewish?
Well, I think, yes, to some degree there's, growing up Jewish, I wasn't a devoutly religious Jew. My parents weren't either, but I was bar mitzvahed. I was, immersed with the culture always really from a young age that I could remember. So there are certain things that were inevitable. I think that I would have pulled on in this experience in making this film. But I'm very fortunate that my ancestors were able to leave Europe prior to the war, and I therefore did not have any direct ancestors who perished in the Holocaust. So my own personal experience with the Holocaust was fortunately limited. But yes, I think uh, it would be remiss to say that I did not was not influenced by my, my growing up as a Jewish kid in Miami. Um, I think that it was just it certainly did have an impact on the way I viewed the world and the way I ultimately told the story.
I imagine you've had at least some survivors who have attended screenings talk to you at some point afterward about their impressions of the film.
I have a number of times internationally and also here in the States.
Um, so when I rewatched the film today, I was struck by how good the lead actress is, and I feel as though I'll probably mispronounce her name if I try, but it's Zuzana Surowi.
Surovi,
Oh,
Surovi.
Surovi.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, I'm interested to know how you came to cast her or what that process was like, because rewatching it, I feel as though so much of the film rests on her ability as an actress to convey all sorts of things during the course of the story.
Yeah. So I'll go back and mention the first day that I met Sarah. I interviewed the fortunate pleasure of being able to interview her a few times before she passed away 2.5 years ago. But the first time I interviewed her, the first question I asked her, I said, how does a young child survive such a thing? Because when I watched your testimony, that's what I couldn't get out of my head. How did you, survive this? And she said immediately by listening and not talking. And she said that she only spoke when spoken to, and that she almost operated like a robot, just kind of going through the daily machinations of, the chores that she had to do around the farm, take care of the boys that she was raising. And at that moment, it kind of crystallized for me who I thought the character was. And it was someone that I felt as though we needed to find who was very evocative, emotive, but without talking. And once we decided to make the film, uh, we committed to filming it in Poland, although it takes place in Ukraine. We felt that it was a better decision for us to make it in Poland, and there was a really wonderful, rich history of filmmaking in Poland and a wealth of talent there. And we started casting it in Warsaw, and I started seeing every young professional actress in Eastern Europe that was there, some from Western Europe as well, and nobody really hit home for me who I thought Sarah was. Either the age wasn't right or just something. And so the casting director and I, a woman named Nadia Levick, came up with an idea to do an open casting call in Poland. And in the back of my mind, I had always kind of thought that we were going to find an amateur, and she thought it was a great idea. So she went to 6 different cities in Poland and put up flyers and posts on Facebook, and saw about 125 young women in each of those towns. And from those 650, 675, she narrowed down to about 175 that she sent me links of. I was here in the United States at that time, and I would review these links. And I remember when I got the link of Susanna, I stopped the tape, and I called my wife over and I said, "Honey, look, I think we just found Sarah. This girl just completely jumped out." Just what I was saying, really, very evocative, emotive, but without trying to be, and very, an intensity that exudes from within that it's really evident just by looking at her face. And ultimately, that's how we found Susanna. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think she, just does a wonderful job. She had never acted before whatsoever, never even like in a theater production. That she just um, always had the interest to act, but never. She lives in a rural town in southern Poland, and had never, never found the opportunity until this came along.
That's really stunning to hear that she had not acted before. I feel as though it's somewhat of a cliche, but sometimes it feels true. So much of her acting in addition to everything else she does, is in her eyes, even what she's able to express in looks. And that's very important in a film where there are so many things that can't be said or shouldn't be said, or people are trying to avoid saying, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we've acquired at least one more audience member since I introduced Steven. I just want to make sure everyone knows. Feel free to put questions in the chat, or if you would like to wave me down in your Zoom window, that's fine too. But you know, as questions come to you, don't need to keep them to a later point. One thing that struck me was the choice to have the characters, for the most part, speak in English. And I would love to hear a bit from you about the thinking behind that, or so how that came to be.
Sorry. Yeah, sure. So once we had committed to making the film, we had brought on a screenwriter named David Himmelstein, and he and I started working on the script together. And one of the first things that we said to each other was, what language are we going to make this film in? Is it going to, because Sarah spoke Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Hebrew, Yiddish, and vacillated between those 5 languages in order to survive in the 18 months or so that she was in hiding. The bulk of that was Ukrainian, well, because she was hiding, on a farm in Ukraine. But we said to ourselves that who we're making this film for, and the primary audience was an American audience, and so that really drove the decision to make the bulk of the film in English. All those other languages that I mentioned besides Ukrainian are in the film in their native tongues. But when she gets to Ukraine, she starts speaking in English, and that was for us. I understand, is a leap that a lot of people have a hard time with, specifically in Europe. I know that a lot of people have had a hard time with, but unfortunately, we didn't make this film primarily for a European audience. We made it for an American audience, and so therefore that was the decision.
One of the things I thought about with regard to the choice of having characters speak in English with each other is that this is something that I think was more common in filmmaking in the past, at least in America, when films were set elsewhere. So to some extent, it may be generational, because one of our selection committee members, who is older, is a senior, was very appreciative of the fact that so much of it was in English, because he said, a lot of the films you show have subtitles, and eventually it's nice to have some films that are mostly in English. So yeah, I think that there's that flip side to it, Yeah,
I heard my grandmother ringing in my ear, same thing. It was a bit more accessible, and obviously we knew that we were going to skew a bit older in our demographic.
Mm-hmm.
But there's obviously there's a number of great films that are in the native language, some that aren't, and it's just a matter of whether I think as a viewer you can suspend that disbelief and buy into it. And my hope is that after the first few moments that people are able to get through it.
Sure. I wanted to hear your thoughts about what struck me as kind of I don't know, the central ethical conundrum that Sarah has to deal with in the film, which is that to survive, as her mother told her, do whatever you must to survive. To do that, Sarah has to deceive the family that she is staying with, or at least attempt to deceive them. As rewatching it, it seemed to me that they begin to suspect partway through pretty strongly that she's at least not who she says, and probably Jewish. But and in doing so, she puts their lives at risk, and that's something in the very, to me, a very moving scene with the priest. He has great sympathy for her situation, but he also says, "Do you realize the danger you're bringing on the family?" So I know that many survivors had ethical dilemmas to deal with that are unimaginable to us. There was no good choice, and they were life or death. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that sort of whole Um, yeah.
Sure. Well, I guess I'm always really interested when people kind of look back on history and they say, I would have done this, or I wouldn't, I adamantly would have done this, or I adamantly wouldn't have done that. And the truth is, none of us know how we would react until we were in that specific instance. And a lot of obviously there were righteous Poles, there were righteous Ukrainians. There were those that knowingly and willingly risked their own lives to hide Jews. There were plenty more that weren't, and gave up their own neighbors. And I guess what I was really drawn to with this material is that it kind of lives in that gray area. It doesn't live in such broad strokes of black and white. And yeah, there was this saying that somebody had pointed out to me, which kind of rang true when David, the writer, and I were working on and looking at these kind of characters based off of those themes that I was just mentioning about. That in war, even God washes his hands. And just we kind of looked at that phrase from the various different characters in the film, of how each character might look at that in a different way. um, and so that's sort of, I guess, I hope that I'm answering your question, but that was sort of our approach, at least to that. um, and again, I guess that that's really one of the things that I'm most proud of when I do hear from people, European audiences who have really embraced it, or even, we were very surprised that there's been a large crossover to a teenage Gentile audience. The film has done very well at a number of international film festivals with teenage Gentile audiences, and hearing from these kids what they responded to so much is that it doesn't really hit you over the head or talk down to them the way that often they felt learning about the Holocaust does. And so, yeah, I guess that was really what, like I said, I was most sort of drawn to early on, and then most proud of when looking back on the film, is that people respond that way.
Well, and I think also kind of to pick up on what you said regarding how some of the teens you spoke to may have experienced Holocaust education. My mother happens to be a Holocaust studies professor, retired now, but and she, I think many other teachers and scholars feel the same way, that it's so overwhelming, especially maybe for people who don't have a family connection of any kind to the topic directly, to tell stories one life at a time. That's kind of a phrase she sticks to a lot. And I think especially for younger people, to be able to take in a story that centers someone their age or even younger, their experience from her perspective, and and just focuses on that one life, even though Sarah's life is connected with other people's in various ways in the film. But yeah, I think that it can be very powerful for adults, but maybe especially for younger people. So I'm glad to hear that it's resonating in that way. One of the scenes that I thought about after I watched the film the first time, and rewatching it, was maybe more powerful even. The scene where Sarah says goodbye after revealing who she is, officially, formally, because at that point she's already said the Shema aloud and has been heard to say that by the family. Um, what were you hoping to convey in that final goodbye scene about Pavlo and Nadia's, the couple's feelings towards Sarah in that process? Because to me, it's open to interpretation what they feel, and maybe that was your goal in terms of, but I imagine there's a lot of feelings there, and I'm just interested if there was something in particular you wanted to kind of convey that they felt about her.
Yes, so I do like open to interpretation, and I again, I purposely didn't want to spell everything out and want some people to be able to see different things, react differently. Um, but that scene, I guess we didn't have the virtue of being able to go and ask Pavlo and Nadia, who those characters were, their perspective. We could only hear from Sarah's. We tried. I mean, we actually went there to the town and uh, found out that both of they're deceased, and the two little young boys are deceased as well. They died in Afghanistan fighting for the Red Army in the late 70s, early 80s. But the family did, after the war, after Sarah left, they did have a daughter, and they named the daughter Manya, which of course was Sarah's posed name of her friend, the name that she took. And I found that to be quite telling. Some of the people I was with didn't. They thought, they kind of called me a romantic, but I just thought that there are a lot of names out there that you could choose. They said Mary is basically Manya, which is a very common name for a religious family. But so ultimately, we had to intuit what these people, where their heads were at throughout this whole experience. And that was something that I think really turned on myself and David, the writer, trying, because there was so much left up to interpretation in terms of, did they know that she was Jewish? 2 years living together almost. Really, what I mean? There's no right answer. And then the question is, okay, well, if they did know, or she obviously, she never told them, she would never risk her own life and would never put them in that place. But if they did know, did they both share that? Did they agree upon that? And when you kind of placed that discussion over, or through the lens of the fact that Sarah was aware that both of them were were cheating on one another. This is, just when I learned that, I just was like, this is this is too good to be true. This is really interesting. I think that because therefore, she kind of had uh, either earned the trust of her employers, or uh, kept their trust, or didn't violate it at all, and kept their secrets. But again, I found this to be a very interesting angle to sort of look at whether or not also what they knew that her true identity.
Yeah, no, and I think that does make for a more interesting, complex film. The not resolving.
And so, sorry to answer your question exactly, but in terms of that scene when she leaves, how would you react to somebody leaving that's been in your home for 2 years, that cared for your two young children? Sarah was not the most descriptive in her, either of the testimonies that she gave, or the opportunity that I had to interview her. She would say things very kind of like matter of fact, and there wasn't much color to the descriptions. And so she never, I asked her, I said, so what happened when you left? Like, how did she say, I just left. And so like, what do you mean you just left? You just left? Yes. She's like, I just got up and walked away. Of course, it's like, it's not a movie. It's, it's her own life. And that was, one of the small kind of aspects that we added to that, because we knew that, we needed, as audiences, we want to see some type of a payoff there. And so therefore that was one part that we did manipulate.
Well, one of the things that kind of passed through my mind was, what can you say as one of the two adults? I mean, the kids mostly, I think, saw her as a beloved, caretaker, but for both Pavlo and Nadia, what can you really say in that situation? I imagine maybe later there were things that they wish they had said or thought they could have said, but it's too much to fully respond to in that moment. It's kind of how it struck me. We have a question from an audience member. If you did any extra research in addition to learning Sarah's story, So, for example, about history of the regional anti-Semitism or partisan movements, regional Christian traditions, New Year's Eve, and so forth. Could you please talk about that?
Sure. So yes, I did an enormous amount of research, pretty much from the moment that I read or first saw Sarah's testimony, uh, all the way into the making of the film. And I am of Polish descent, half of my family, and so I had been to Poland once before, and actually had worked on a film in Poland once before, but had a very peripheral understanding of the complexities of what was going on there. And in fact, I remember when I was in Poland now 12 years ago, they making that film the first time, when I learned that Jewish history in Poland goes back to the 1400s. I was I was like, I was really blown away and learned all about kind of the early Jewish settlers into Poland, and King Kazimierz, and opening up, and inviting all of the Jews in. Um, I'm a history buff, and so I guess I just kind of dug in more and more and more. And then once we got into specifically Ukraine, I mean, it was all Poland. There was no Ukraine. It was all Poland at one time. But then what ultimately became Ukraine, the territory of Ukraine during the war, I learned much more about the complexities there. There's a wonderful museum in Warsaw, I should mention, called the Poland Museum of Jewish History in Poland. And I went there a number of times and worked with a few of their historians, and they really shed a lot of light on the subject to me. And then was fortunate. The USC Shoah Foundation was a producing partner on the film, so the executive director of the Shoah Foundation, a wonderful man named Stephen Smith, who's just a great mind, was a huge help and influence for us early on with the film, in terms of making sure that the historical accuracy was top notch. That was something that we from the start we knew we had to get right, all the way to working with historians and ethnographers in Europe when we were over there scouting and making the film. But specifically, your question about the New Year's, if I understand you right, there's the scene in the film Malanka, Malanka, and Malanka is uh, still goes on today. It's a part of the Eastern Orthodox um, tradition. It's kind of like Christmas caroling around Christmas time. They go from home to home, and there's a number of different characters that have gone back hundreds and hundreds of years that still stick around. There's a soldier and a bear and a money lender, and the money lender is a Hasidic looking Jew. And so I had seen this in a documentary that the Shoah Foundation actually had made about 8 years ago, and it was a look at modern day Ukraine and the ties, the connections to anti-Semitism, and it showed that Malanka is still practiced to this day. And so I remember I called David, the screenwriter, and I said, this would be so wonderful to be able to incorporate into the film. And we checked it out and made sure that this was all was accurately done. And so that's that's how that bit got into the film. But again, that's an example, not something that Sarah mentioned. She didn't talk about Malanka, but we know that she was living in Ukraine with an Eastern Orthodox family who was religious and had to go to church every week with them. So therefore, we would assume that around Christmas time they would have performed and practiced Malanka.
Well, and it makes for a chilling moment as well when Nadia pushes Sarah into the middle of the circle as the Jew, right? And that's part of the sort of pageantry that is going on, but you can see it in Sarah's face that she's momentarily terrified to be singled out, even if no one else realizes the irony. Well, thank you for elaborating
Absolutely.
a bit. I'm interested to know, because you were portraying something based on real events, a story based on real events, are there ways in which your documentary background influenced how you made the film?
Yes. So to me, the biggest challenge in documentary work is building that trust with your subject, because ideally you want them to feel completely comfortable with you and to forget about the camera that you have following them and they're in their face. And I've the two feature documentaries that I've made have been just that, following along with someone, main characters, for a number of years. And so you really have to earn that trust. And then so that was something that I absolutely applied to actors in the narrative setting. Like, different, obviously, like different capacity, but really having to earn that trust, and a lot of that comes with, for me, the rehearsal process. I'm a big believer in the rehearsal process. So we had 8 weeks of rehearsal in Warsaw before we ever stepped foot on the set. And in that time, we had a lot of, it was with the main characters generally, but we had a lot of deep discussions, and the main characters, I always would kind of hold up my hands like this, like a triangle, because we have Sarah and Nadia and Pavlo, and that's ultimately what the film is about. And um, well, the actor who plays Pavlo is my age; he's in his mid 40s. The young woman who plays Nadia, was only in her mid 20s, but way more mature than both of us. And then we had this young Susanna, who was 15 when we first started making the film. And um, we're dealing with some very adult, complex themes. And this kind of goes back, Neal, to your earlier question. Like, there had to have been such a level of understanding between the three of them. Um, and we really, we talked about that a lot. So I think there's discussions. They gained my trust, and we all, we're in agreement there. And then the other aspect to my documentary background that I think has become very helpful is really, I think you need to, you really, when you're doing a documentary interview, or whenever I'm doing a documentary interview, I kind of go into it with a set of questions that I want, because ultimately, if I know what responses I'd like to get out of the subject. But oftentimes, for one reason or another, people don't want to tell you what you want to hear, or you kind of get sidetracked, and so much of it is listening. It's not going to your next question on the piece of paper. It's listening to what that person is telling you, because there could be some gold in there, or it could go to another extemporaneous question that you hadn't written down. And so this listening, again, was something that I brought to my narrative work, for sure, and listening not only to actors, but to all of the incredible artists that we were able to work with over there in Poland. And really, again, that's my process. I'm a very collaborative person. I like to be the least talented person on the set, and surround myself with people that are all way better at their job than I am, and hopefully communicate to them what my vision is. But everybody that I work with, I give a lot of autonomy to, and inspiration to kind of bring their own angle. And so ultimately, that's what I would listen for. I would listen what their people were interested in, what angle they wanted to pursue, that hopefully wouldn't be too divergent from my own.
It dispels a stereotypical notion about the film director as someone who clings too much to control over a project, but rather, as you're saying, making sure that you're not the only person the success or failure of the project rides on, that there are so many other people that are sharing in the work. So it's good to hear, certainly.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
was there something in particular, probably more than one thing, but was there something you could talk about that you learned about filmmaking in the making of this film?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'd say, gosh, a number of things. Well, I guess I like to try to describe when I describe what it is like to make a film to somebody who who doesn't have any really experience seeing it or hearing or reading about it is that like it's like you have these two worlds going on. You've got the actors and they're all here and they're crazy and I mean crazy in a good way. Like it's I love actors because they're just completely they're floating around like right here. And then you've got your artists behind the camera that are over here who are all very technical people by and large, and this is all very very um, dialed in. By the time you get onto the set, everybody that knows exactly what they're going to do, so that you're mitigating the time that you're sitting around going, oh, what are we going to do? So you've got these two worlds going on, and you ultimately need to kind of get the technical world going in what the plan was, and then introduce this completely unpredictable yet magical component of the actors, and hope that you they sync up, but they synchronize for the few moments that each of the cameras are rolling for the takes, and that within that that's where you look for these moments. And um, I didn't really know. I didn't have a full understanding of that, of explaining all of that, because I had not worked in narrative work by and large until this. But just also, how these moments are so fleeting, where you really do get these moments of gold, and hopefully you get enough of them that you could string together a successful film. And I feel as though we did. As with any of my pieces of work, it's hard to watch. I'm overly critical, and all I see are the deficiencies and not the gold. But sort of just how much work goes into it, to something, to a day, to a scene, to get such a small little piece of usable footage.
Yeah, I imagine that's something that a person who's never been a filmmaker can. It's hard to really convey that, right? I'm not someone
I
who.
did an awful job.
No, 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 no. That's not what I mean. I just think that we are watching such a finished product that has gone through. And every so often, even watching a film with my wife and son, we'll see how long the credits are, and I'll say, "Did you know that all of those people worked on this film? It took all of those people." And but it's just hard to really fully get if you're not immersed in that process. So it's something to at least think about as a viewer, even if you can't fully grasp it. Um, was the scene in which Sarah, the climactic scene, really, in which she does say the Shema during the bombing, is that something that to your knowledge happened?
No, it did not. Again, Sarah never revealed her true identity to
Mm.
her employers. Um, you know, what I had said earlier, that when I asked Sarah how somebody survives such a thing, and she said by listening and not talking, you
Mm.
know, and it gave me a very clear picture of who this person was, but also I was aware that the character was rather passive, but therefore have to be rather passive, and this is not what you want for your main character for like movie making 101. You generally want an active protagonist that goes after what he or she wants. And obviously, we couldn't do that because Sarah would not have survived. And so, she had to be passive and be a result of most of the things happening around her. But again, because we were making a movie and not a documentary, and we had said that early on, um, as an audience member, I think there's a tendency you might feel cheated if you don't ever see a character, proclaim who they are, and kind of own, go through a trajectory of where you're following them for the most of the film. But at the end of the film, if they stay in that one note, it's not going to be as fulfilling from an audience perspective, in my opinion.
The
If you
catharsis. The catharsis.
right, exactly, if you can kind of let it out. So that's why we came up with this idea that she, because her parents did tell her, if you get caught, say the Shema,
Mhm.
meaning because you're going to die, and so we thought, okay, well, we could put her in a situation where she thinks she's about to die, therefore she kind of instinctually starts saying the Shema.
Mhm. Yes, I muted
There you go.
myself by
All right.
accident. Sorry about that, everyone.
No problem.
I really only had one more question, and I'm certainly happy if anyone has any last questions themselves. But I would love to know how we can see Kid Yamaka.
Sure. Kid Yamak is easy to see.
Okay.
It's online, available on YouTube, or all you need to put in your Google search browser is Kid Yamaka, and or Vice. The Vice Sports, VICE. It's
Yeah.
Vice. It's on their website as well. And tragically, Zach Woolman, who is Kid Yamaka, passed away 3 weeks ago.
Oh, geez.
And yeah, I was at his memorial service 2 weekends ago,
I'm
and
sorry to hear that.
yes, it's I wasn't very close with him, but thank you. But yeah, I know he has a young wife, and his father and mother, brother, are all obviously having a tough time. But yeah, it was a real honor to be able to make that film, work on that film with a frequent collaborator of mine, a very talented filmmaker named Matt Ogans. We did that together. So.
I'll go ahead and link to the film from our Facebook page.
Great,
Yeah,
wonderful. Yeah,
it sounds like an amazing story, and so I'd love to see it too.
yeah, it's worth a shot. I
Well,
think it's 14 minutes long, so not that long.
very good. Okay. Well, Steven, I want to say I really appreciate your time. I know that you're in our time zone, but it's still getting a bit late, so I appreciate your staying up for this. And
You're welcome. Thank you,
yeah,
Neal.
yeah, and
You got it.
it's really it's wonderful to be able to talk to the people behind the films we show, and this year we're doing more of that than we've ever been able to. So I'm really appreciative of that. So thank you for your time and for your thoughts, and thanks to all those who attended tonight. And yeah, I wish you well in your
Thank you.
future endeavors.
Thank you very much. Have a nice week, everyone. Take care.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, Steven.